This is my true story. I worked hard for 40 years, saving every dollar for the day my wife and I could finally rest. I thought we'd grow old together in peace, surrounded by everything we'd built. But one morning, I checked our account and found nothing. The money was gone, and so was the trust. When I asked her, she smiled and said, "It's my retirement." That smile changed everything. My heart broke, but I didn't break with it. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me where you're watching from, and please subscribe so my story can reach more people. It started like any other morning. I woke up early, made my coffee, and sat down at the small wooden table in the living room, the same spot where I'd paid bills and balanced budgets for decades. The house was quiet. My wife was still asleep, or at least pretending to be. I went to the cabinet to pull out the old brown envelope where I kept our savings, physical cash stacked neatly, labeled year by year. It wasn't much by the world's standards, but to me, it was a lifetime of sweat, overtime hours, and skipped luxuries. That envelope had been my comfort, a reminder that I had done right by my family. But that morning, when I reached into the drawer, my fingers found only air. The envelope was gone. At first, I thought maybe she had moved it. My wife liked to reorganize things without telling me. So I searched the other drawers, then the wardrobe, then the cabinet by the hallway. Nothing. I went online to check our joint account, just to reassure myself everything was fine. That's when I saw it. A series of transfers, all recent, all authorized under her name. Thousands of dollars gone in just a few weeks. Transfers to an account I didn't recognize. At first I thought maybe there was a mistake. Maybe she'd moved the money temporarily for safety or investment. But the more I scrolled, the clearer it became. It wasn't an accident. She had been draining it slowly, bit by bit, while I was busy working, while I was busy trusting her. I printed the statements, each one like a knife through my chest. I waited until she came into the kitchen, humming like it was just another normal day. She poured herself coffee, smiled, and said something casual about groceries. I looked at her and felt a kind of quiet I'd never felt before. I asked where the money was. She didn't even flinch. She looked straight at me and said, "It's my retirement. You've got your pension, don't you? You'll be fine." Then she took another sip of coffee, like she hadn't just stolen 4 decades of my life. I didn't answer her. I didn't shout. I didn't throw anything. I just stood there and listened to the sound of her spoon tapping the mug. That sound stayed with me for hours. It wasn't about the money, not entirely. It was about what it meant. That tap, that smile, that tone. It told me something I had refused to see for years. This wasn't just theft. It was betrayal that had been planned, packaged, and delivered with a smile. She didn't see it as wrong. She saw it as her right. I sat in the living room the rest of that day, staring at the papers. Every memory of our marriage played in my head like a movie. The first years when we shared everything, the laughter, the vacations, the small victories. I remembered how she used to tell me she felt safe because I was responsible. I used to believe that meant we were a team. But teams don't steal from each other. Teams don't smile when one partner is left with nothing. The more I thought, the clearer it became. Love had left our home long ago, and I was the only one who hadn't noticed. I went through our old documents, tax returns, and insurance policies. She had started changing details months ago, small things that most people wouldn't catch. Her name added here, mine removed there. She had been preparing for this, step by step, waiting for the right time. That realization didn't make me angry. It made me focused, because I finally understood what kind of battle I was in. Not a fight of emotions, a fight of facts, law, and logic. When night came, she acted like everything was fine. She asked what I wanted for dinner. I said nothing. She watched her shows and scrolled through her phone while I sat quietly, pretending to read the newspaper. But I wasn't reading. I was thinking. About every document, every account, every asset. About how much she thought I didn't know. About how many things she assumed I'd forgotten because I was old. She didn't realize that I had built our life piece by piece, and I remembered every single one. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay there next to her, staring at the ceiling, listening to her soft breathing, the sound of someone who had stolen everything and could still rest easy. That's when it hit me. The woman beside me wasn't my partner anymore. She was a stranger wearing a familiar face. And I made a promise to myself right then. I wasn't going to confront her in anger or sink into bitterness. I was going to take back what was mine the same way she took it, quietly, legally, and completely. By dawn, my mind was clear. She had her plan. Now I had mine. I didn't speak a single word about it the next morning. I made my coffee, read the newspaper, and sat across from her like nothing had changed. She talked about groceries, bills, and plans for the weekend, as if the air wasn't thick with lies. I watched her, every move, every expression. She looked calm, comfortable, even smug, like someone who had already won. That calmness told me everything. She thought I would do nothing. She thought age had made me soft, predictable, weak. That was her mistake. Old men don't fight loud battles. We plan quiet wars. And I had just declared one. After breakfast, when she left to meet her friends, I went straight to my office room. The drawer still had old files, documents, and receipts. Things most people would have thrown away years ago. Not me. I had kept everything. Decades of proof, account statements, property deeds, insurance records, and tax filings. Each piece of paper was a fragment of the truth she thought she could bury. I stacked them all neatly on the desk and started sorting through them, one by one. Hours passed. The clock struck noon, then evening. My eyes burned, but I didn't stop. I found what I was looking for, a pattern. Every joint asset, every bank account, every title. Some were still in both our names. Others, she had cleverly shifted to hers. But she had made one fatal mistake. She forgot about the accounts and investments I had set up before our marriage. Back then, I had done it to protect her in case anything happened to me. Ironically, those same accounts were now my protection from her. I checked the ownership of our home next. The deed was in both our names, but the mortgage had been paid entirely from my salary. Every deposit, every transfer, every receipt had my signature on it. And in the eyes of the law, that mattered more than her claims. I didn't smile, but I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: control. Quiet, steady control. The kind that doesn't come from yelling or threats, but from knowledge. By the time the sun went down, I had mapped everything. What she had, what I had, and what she didn't know I still controlled. I opened a fresh notebook and began writing my plan step by step. Step 1. Freeze the accounts she couldn't touch. Step 2. Update the power of attorney. Step 3. Contact the lawyer who had handled our will and property filings. Step 4. Act without emotion. No shouting, no pleading, no warnings. Just signatures, laws, and consequences. When she came home that night, she was cheerful. She mentioned something about a new cruise advertisement she'd seen online, about us traveling next year. The irony almost made me laugh. She was planning vacations with money she had stolen. I nodded, pretending to listen. Inside, I was counting down hours. Every sentence she spoke felt like another reason to finish what I had started. I didn't hate her. I didn't even want revenge. I wanted balance. She had taken from me what I had earned. All I wanted was to take back what was mine, not with anger, but with precision. People underestimate silence, but silence is powerful when you know the truth. It gives you time to think, to prepare, to strike when the timing is perfect. I slept better that night than I had in weeks. The decision was made. There was no turning back now. I woke early the next morning and watched her still sleeping beside me. The same woman I once trusted with everything now represented everything I needed to reclaim. She thought she had outsmarted me, that she had written the final chapter of our story. But she had no idea that I was holding the pen again. As I got dressed, I looked in the mirror and saw not a broken man, but a builder. The same man who had built every part of this life from scratch. My reflection reminded me of something I had once told my younger self. Never lose control of what you create. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that rule. She reminded me of it. Painfully, yes, but effectively. I left the house without saying a word. She asked where I was going, and I told her just out for errands. But what I was really doing was starting the process of taking back my freedom. That morning wasn't just another day. It was the first day of my plan, calm, calculated, and inevitable. By evening, I had every document ready to show my lawyer. My mind was sharp, my hands steady. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a man preparing to take back everything stolen under the disguise of love. The war had already begun, and she didn't even know she was losing it. When I started gathering everything for my case, I couldn't stop thinking about how long it had taken to build what she tore down in a few quiet months. Every paper I touched, every receipt I unfolded, carried years of sacrifice behind it. The house we lived in didn't come from luck. It came from calloused hands, sleepless nights, and 1,000 small decisions made with care. I worked double shifts at the plant when our son was young. I fixed cars on weekends, took freelance jobs after retirement age, and skipped vacations so the mortgage could be paid early. I gave her comfort she never had to earn. That was my mistake. I mistook comfort for loyalty. When we first married, she was kind, soft-spoken, the kind of woman who could make a simple dinner feel like a celebration. I promised her stability, and she promised me love. For years, we lived quietly, never rich, but never worried. I handled every bill, every policy, every long-term plan. She handled the house, the meals, and the image of our perfect life. I thought it was teamwork. It wasn't. It was a transaction, one I never saw clearly until now. She never once asked how much we had saved. She didn't need to. She knew I would handle it, and I did, because I believed she would never turn that trust against me. When our son left for college, I thought we were entering our golden years. The house was paid off, the cars were ours, the savings were strong. I used to sit on the porch and tell her, "We did it." She'd nod, smile, and talk about the trips we'd take, the peace we'd earned. Looking back, I realized she wasn't talking about us. She was talking about her. Every sentence about the future had slowly stopped including me. I didn't notice it at the time, but it was already there, the small shift from we to I. Over the years, she'd say little things that should have warned me. "You'll always have your pension. You don't need much to be happy. Money doesn't matter if one of us has enough." At the time, I thought she was just being careless with words. Now I see she was setting the foundation for what she'd eventually do. It wasn't sudden. It was planned, rehearsed, and perfectly timed. She waited until my body slowed down, until my trust was complete, until I was too tired to notice the small disappearances. She stole like a professional thief, not in one night, but over many. The hardest part to accept wasn't the money being gone. It was realizing that the person I built my life around had seen me not as a partner, but as a provider whose job was finished. She saw my love as an investment that had finally matured, one she could cash out. She called it retirement. I called it betrayal. She didn't just take the savings, she took the meaning behind them. Every dollar I had saved was tied to a moment. The hospital bill I covered when she was sick, the anniversary trips I canceled to stay on budget, the new car I never bought because she wanted a remodeled kitchen instead. All those choices were small pieces of love, and now they were gone, sitting in an account with her name on it. People think financial betrayal is about greed, but it's deeper than that. It's about disrespect. When someone steals your money, they take your effort. When it's someone you love, they take your dignity too. I sat there one night looking at the empty drawer where the envelope used to be and realized that she hadn't just stolen cash. She had stolen the proof of a lifetime's worth of choices. But that realization didn't crush me. It hardened me. Because when you've built everything once, you know how to build again, smarter this time. I wasn't going to cry about what was gone. I was going to make sure she never took anything again. Not a cent, not a right, not an ounce of freedom. Every minute of work, every dollar earned, every document signed over the years, all of it was coming back to me, one way or another. By the time I finished writing my notes that night, I had written more than numbers. I had written history. The full story of a man who gave everything and learned the cost of blind trust. The years I gave her were gone. The years I had left would be mine. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. I didn't tell her where I was going. She was still asleep, lying comfortably in the bed that my hands had built and my paychecks had maintained. I looked at her for a moment, not with anger, but with a kind of cold clarity. Everything about her seemed peaceful. Maybe that was what bothered me most. The peace of someone who thought she'd already won. I grabbed the folder I had prepared the night before, filled with copies of bank statements, property deeds, and old contracts, and I walked out quietly. The morning air was crisp, and for the first time in months, I felt awake. Truly awake. I drove to the same office where I had signed our will 20 years earlier. The sign above the door hadn't changed. Franklin and Associates, Family Law and Estate. I parked the car and sat there for a minute, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I wasn't nervous, I was steady. I walked in, greeted the receptionist, and told her I needed to see Mr. Franklin himself. She looked up, recognized my name, and said he'd be right with me. When he stepped out of his office, his face lit up with recognition. "It's been a long time," he said, offering a handshake. I nodded. "Too long," I replied. He asked how my wife was. I told him she was fine, then handed him the folder. He sat down, started flipping through the documents, and within minutes, his expression changed. He didn't need a speech. The numbers spoke for themselves. Every transaction, every withdrawal, every transfer, all in her name, all unauthorized. He looked up at me and said softly, "You're ready to end it, aren't you?" I nodded once. There was no emotion left in that answer, just decision. We spent the next 3 hours going through every detail. He asked questions. I had answers. He drafted forms. I signed them. Divorce papers, asset freeze orders, property claim reversals. Each page I signed didn't feel like paperwork. It felt like breathing again. For years, I had been holding my breath, pretending everything was fine, pretending that trust still existed. Now, with each signature, I was letting that air out. He explained that once the documents were filed, she wouldn't be able to move any assets, sell any property, or touch a single dollar from our accounts. Everything would be locked until the court reviewed it. That was the first time I smiled in weeks, not out of joy, but out of relief. When we finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, "You're doing the right thing. It's not revenge. It's correction." Those words stayed with me. Correction. That was exactly what it was. I wasn't punishing her. I was restoring balance. She had broken the rules of marriage, the rules of honesty, and the rules of partnership. Now she was going to live by the rules of law. Rules written not by emotion, but by consequence. Before I left, he asked if I wanted to rewrite my will. I said yes. The old one had her name all over it. Beneficiary, executor, decision maker. That ended today. I made sure every asset, every policy, every account had new instructions. Some would go to charity, some to our son, some to my own trust. Not a penny would go to her. The pen felt heavy in my hand as I signed the last page. But when I placed it down, my hand felt lighter than it had in years. I walked out of that office and stood by the car, looking at the sunlight cutting through the buildings. It felt like the first clear day after a long storm. I wasn't free yet, not legally, but mentally, I was already out. I drove home slowly, thinking about how strange life is. You can share decades with someone, eat at the same table, sleep under the same roof, and still end up on opposite sides of a battlefield. But this wasn't war. This was reclamation. When I got home, she was sitting on the couch, watching television, still in her robe, sipping tea. She smiled and asked if I had gone out for groceries. I said yes. She didn't notice the folder in my hand or the look on my face. She had no idea that the foundation under her comfort was already shifting. As she laughed at something on the screen, I realized the perfect irony. She thought she had taken my freedom, but in that moment, I had already taken hers. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in months. The lawyer had the papers. The clock was ticking. Her retirement plan was about to meet mine, and mine came with justice. That evening, everything in the house looked perfectly normal, almost too normal. She was in the kitchen cooking stew, humming an old song from the radio. The same woman who had drained my savings now moved around our kitchen like nothing had happened, like we were still the same couple from years ago. The smell of onions and spices filled the room, and for a moment, I just watched her. I wondered how many times she had stood there humming while planning her next move. She asked me to taste the broth, to see if it needed salt. I did. It was good, like it always was. But I couldn't taste anything beyond the bitterness sitting in my throat. She talked about small things, a sale at the market, a neighbor's new car, a vacation brochure she'd found online. She spoke as if we had a future, as if she hadn't stolen mine. Every word she said sounded rehearsed, like she was trying to convince both of us that nothing had changed. But everything had. I had already signed the papers, the divorce petition, the asset freeze, the property claims. They were already moving through the system. She was smiling and stirring soup while her world was slowly being dismantled. I sat at the table quietly, nodding when she spoke, pretending to care about her stories. But inside, I was counting hours. Every clock tick meant one step closer to freedom. It wasn't anger keeping me quiet. It was strategy. When you've been betrayed this deeply, shouting feels useless. Silence becomes your weapon. She didn't notice the difference. She mistook my calm for defeat. That was fine with me. I wanted her comfortable, distracted, unprepared. After dinner, she talked about cruises again, said she'd been researching retirement travel plans. She wanted to see Italy, France, maybe Greece. She said she deserved it after everything we'd been through. The words almost made me laugh. We. There was no we left. There was only her plan and my response. She was talking about a new chapter of her life, but she didn't know I had already written the ending. I told her to book whatever she wanted, to enjoy herself. Her eyes lit up. She thought she still had control. Later that night, she brought me a cup of tea. She sat beside me on the couch, leaned against me like old times, and talked about how lucky we were to have made it this far. I looked straight ahead at the television and let her words fade into noise. I realized something then. Betrayal isn't always loud or violent. Sometimes it wears a soft robe, hums while cooking, and tells you everything will be fine. That's how deceit survives, by pretending to be normal. Before bed, she took her tablet out and started checking her online account. I watched her face change. She frowned slightly, refreshed the page, then frowned again. She didn't say anything, but I knew what she saw. The account she used to drain my savings was now locked. I had already requested the freeze earlier that day. Her fingers tapped the screen a few more times, then stopped. She looked up at me, forced a smile, and said she was tired. I said goodnight. When she turned off the light, I stayed awake. The silence was thick. I could hear her breathing, slow and steady. It's strange, sharing a bed with someone you no longer recognize. I thought about all the years I had mistaken habit for love. You can live beside someone for decades, and yet one betrayal can make them feel like a stranger overnight. Still, I didn't hate her. Not yet. Hate is heavy. I was done carrying heavy things. At dawn, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the light spread over the yard. I thought about the young man I used to be, the one who believed marriage meant loyalty. I thought about the middle-aged man who built everything while ignoring the small cracks. And now, I thought about the old man who finally understood that love without respect is just comfort with an expiration date. When she woke up, she smiled at me like nothing was wrong. She kissed my cheek and asked if I wanted pancakes. I said yes, but in my mind, I was already hearing the knock that was coming, the one that would end the act. The calm before truth always feels quietest right before it breaks. That morning, she went about her routine as usual. I stayed silent, still, patient. She thought the silence meant surrender. She didn't realize it was the sound of justice approaching. The morning the papers arrived felt ordinary at first. The sun was out, the smell of pancakes filled the air, and she was humming again, the same tune she always hummed when she was content. I sat at the table with my coffee, calm and steady, pretending to read the newspaper while my eyes watched the clock. I knew what time the courier was scheduled to arrive. I'd planned it that way, precisely 8:30 a.m., just before she usually left for her morning walk. The kitchen looked peaceful, but inside me, every second felt like a countdown. I wasn't nervous. I was ready. This was the moment the quiet plan would finally speak for itself. Right on schedule, the doorbell rang. A sharp, polite ring, not too long, not too soft. She wiped her hands on a towel and went to answer it. From where I sat, I could see her through the hallway mirror. 2 uniformed officers stood at the door, their expressions professional but firm. She greeted them with that same confident smile she wore whenever strangers came around. The kind of smile that said, "I control this house." That confidence lasted exactly 5 seconds. One of the officers handed her a sealed envelope and said her name. She nodded, confused, signed the form, and thanked them politely. Then she shut the door. When she turned around, she looked puzzled. "Who serves papers this early?" she muttered, tearing open the envelope with one finger. I stayed seated, silent, letting her discover the truth on her own. Her eyes scanned the first line, then the second. The color drained from her face almost instantly. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Then, slowly, she read the bold words at the top. Petition for divorce and asset recovery. Her hand started shaking. The paper slipped slightly, brushing the floor. For a long few seconds, there was silence. Just the sound of the clock ticking. She blinked, as if trying to make sense of it, flipping through the pages again. Each page confirmed what she didn't want to believe. The asset freeze, the joint account hold, the property claim reversal. All of it was listed clearly. Her signature wasn't needed for any of it. I had already taken care of that. Everything had been done by the law, every step through the same system she thought she could use against me. When she finally spoke, her voice was flat. "What is this?" she asked, though she already knew. I didn't answer. I just took a sip of coffee and looked her in the eye. That silence said more than words ever could. She laughed once, a weak, nervous laugh that didn't last. She looked back at the papers and flipped through them again, faster this time, as if she could find a loophole hidden somewhere in the text. There wasn't one. Her face turned from confusion to disbelief, then to panic. She looked toward her phone, probably thinking about calling the bank, or maybe her friends, the same friends she used to brag to about her savings. I watched her hesitate. She knew deep down that the phone calls wouldn't help. This wasn't a fight she could talk her way out of. The law was already in motion. She sat down at the table across from me, the same table where we had once planned our future together. Only now, we weren't partners. We were 2 sides of a balance sheet. I looked at her hands, the same hands that once held mine, now trembling over papers stamped with legal seals. She tried to speak again, to ask questions, to defend herself, but her voice kept cracking. Eventually, she stopped trying. She just sat there, staring at the last page of the document, the one that spelled out the full division of assets, all returned to me, pending court approval. I finished my coffee, folded my newspaper, and stood up. My chair scraped softly against the floor, the sound sharp in the quiet kitchen. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The message was already written across every line of that petition. She had stolen my savings and called it her retirement. Now I was taking her comfort and calling it justice. As I walked past her toward the door, she whispered something I couldn't make out. Maybe my name, maybe a plea. But I didn't turn back. I stepped outside, breathing in the morning air, feeling lighter than I had in years. Behind me, I could hear her moving through the kitchen, her calm mask cracking piece by piece. For decades, she had been the one in control. She decided what to buy, what to save, what to keep hidden. Now, for the first time, she understood what it felt like to have her choices taken from her. Legally, precisely, silently. The papers had done what words never could. They had ended the illusion. That evening, she didn't cook. She didn't talk. She just sat in the living room with those papers in her lap, reading them over and over like they were written in another language. In a way, they were. They were written in mine, the language of truth, proof, and consequence. The peace I had waited for finally arrived, not with noise, but with a single knock on the door and a simple envelope. For the first few days after the papers were served, she moved through the house like a ghost. She didn't speak to me much, just watched me from across rooms, her face twisted somewhere between disbelief and pride. I could tell she still thought this was a bluff, that I'd come to my senses, that I'd tear up the papers like an emotional fool. That was how she'd always seen me, predictable, soft, easy to talk down. But I wasn't that man anymore. I didn't raise my voice, didn't argue, didn't even look at her long enough to fuel her denial. I just went about my days, calm, steady, detached. That quiet scared her more than anger ever could. She tried pretending at first. The morning after, she made breakfast like nothing had happened. She even placed a cup of tea beside me, just like always. I thanked her, drank it, and went back to my reading. No fight, no reaction. That's when her control started to slip. By the third day, she began testing the waters. Small comments, little jabs meant to pull emotion out of me. "You're really doing this? After everything I've done for you? You'll regret it when you're alone." I let her words hang in the air and fade. She didn't realize the truth yet, that I had been alone for years, even while sitting beside her. She'd left me long before I ever filed for divorce. When her denial started to crumble, anger took its place. She slammed cabinets, broke a plate, yelled that I was destroying the family name. I didn't respond. Anger thrives on attention. Silence starves it. She called her friends for sympathy, but news travels fast, and so does truth. Most of them had already heard what she'd done. Some stopped taking her calls altogether. The few who did listen offered her polite pity, but no defense. She told them I was being cold and heartless. Maybe I was, but I wasn't wrong. Then came the pleading. One afternoon, I found her sitting at the dining table, eyes red, holding our wedding photo. She said she didn't mean to hurt me, that she thought the money would be shared anyway. I almost laughed at that. Shared, like everything else she had slowly claimed over the years. She wanted forgiveness, but she didn't understand that forgiveness doesn't come before accountability. You can't steal from someone's life and then cry when the lock changes. I told her plainly that this wasn't about revenge. It was about closure. She didn't believe me. People like her never do. They think the world runs on apologies and guilt. It doesn't. It runs on consequence. The days passed, and the silence between us became unbearable. For her, not for me. I found peace in routine again. I mowed the lawn, fixed the porch light, read the paper. She spent her time pacing through rooms, staring at her phone, waiting for someone to tell her this was all a bad dream. But no one called. The banks had frozen her accounts. The lawyer had confirmed every document was filed. The judge had already reviewed the financial transfers. It was all moving forward exactly as planned. Her comfort was collapsing quietly, the same way she had taken mine. She started spending more time in the bedroom, sometimes crying, sometimes furious. I didn't check on her. That's what she expected. For me to break, to feel guilty, to comfort her like I always had. But this time, I didn't. I had spent too many years carrying her burdens, smoothing her edges, fixing her mistakes. This was her weight to bear. She had taken my savings, my trust, and my peace. Now she could live with her own choices. The neighbors began to notice the change. She used to wave at everyone, walk proudly to the mailbox, host tea on Sundays. Now she kept the curtains closed. Pride doesn't like witnesses. I think she finally started to understand what she'd lost. Not the money, but the control. The man she used to manage, manipulate, and mold had vanished. In his place stood someone she couldn't predict anymore. That frightened her most. One night, she came into the living room, stood by the door, and said, "I never thought you'd do this to me." I didn't look up from my book. I said quietly, "Neither did I." That was the last full sentence we exchanged for weeks. She still slept in the house, still used the same bed, but it wasn't a home anymore. It was just two strangers waiting for a date on a calendar, the court hearing. I could tell she was counting down the days, probably hoping for a miracle. I wasn't hoping for anything. Hope is for people who still trust. I didn't. I had replaced hope with certainty. By the end of that week, she stopped talking altogether. The denial was over. She knew the papers were real. She knew the silence was final. And though she still wore the wedding ring, we both knew it was nothing but metal now. Another thing that once had meaning, but no longer did. The day of the hearing came faster than I expected. The courthouse was small, quiet, and cold, the kind of place where lives are unmade with simple words and signatures. I arrived early, dressed neatly in the same gray suit I'd worn to our wedding decades ago. It still fit, but it didn't carry the same meaning. She arrived 20 minutes later, wearing a bright scarf and forced confidence. Her lawyer walked beside her, whispering something, probably trying to prepare her for what was coming. She didn't look at me as she entered, but I could see the way her hands fidgeted. Beneath the arrogance, she was scared. And she should have been. We were asked to sit in the waiting area before being called in. She kept glancing toward me, hoping for a sign of weakness. There was none. I stayed silent, my folder of documents on my lap. Everything I needed was already inside. The bank statements, transfer logs, copies of her signatures, proof of withdrawal dates. Every page told the same story, a theft dressed as entitlement. When the clerk called our names, we walked into the courtroom, and the quiet echo of our footsteps sounded like the final march of something long dead. The judge was calm, professional, uninterested in drama. He didn't care about emotions, only evidence. Our lawyers made their introductions, and then the questions began. My lawyer presented everything in order: transaction dates, account details, authorization logs. Each one pointed to her. I sat still, hands folded, while her lawyer tried to argue it was shared money between spouses. But the judge wasn't fooled. He asked one question that broke her entire defense. "Did you inform your husband before transferring these amounts?" She hesitated, eyes darting toward her lawyer, then muttered something too soft to hear. The judge asked her to repeat it. "No," she said. One word. That was all it took. From there, it went downhill for her. My lawyer produced the joint account agreement, showing that all withdrawals above a certain amount required written consent from both parties, a clause she had signed herself 20 years ago. The judge raised an eyebrow and leaned back in his chair. Her face went pale. For the next hour, every attempt her lawyer made to justify her actions only made it worse. Retirement savings, miscommunication, trust, domestic understanding. The judge waved it all off. He said clearly, "This isn't misunderstanding. It's misappropriation." When it was her turn to speak, she tried to play the emotional card. Said she had felt insecure, that she needed something for herself after years of sacrifice. The judge let her finish, then looked down at the evidence again. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "this account shows over $400,000 in unauthorized transfers over 8 months. That's not insecurity. That's intent." She went silent after that. Her lawyer whispered to her, but she didn't respond. Her hands trembled, clutching the papers in front of her like they could save her. The verdict didn't take long. The judge ruled in my favor. Complete asset return, frozen accounts to be transferred back under my control, the house granted solely to me. She was ordered to repay any missing funds through liquidation of her personal holdings. I didn't smile when the gavel hit the table. I didn't feel joy or victory. What I felt was air, clean, sharp air filling my lungs after years of suffocation. My lawyer shook my hand quietly. Hers avoided her eyes. When the judge left the room, she stayed seated, staring at the empty chair. Her face looked smaller somehow, drained of everything she once used to tower over me. She gathered her things slowly, like someone collecting fragments of a life that no longer fit together. As she walked past me, she paused, maybe hoping for a reaction, anger, satisfaction, something. I gave her none. I just nodded politely and said, "Take care." Outside the courthouse, the sunlight hit me like it used to before the weight of betrayal. My lawyer handed me the official paperwork, the signatures, seals, and confirmation of ownership. It was done. The system she once mocked for being too slow to matter had finally caught up with her. I drove home in silence, the radio off, the road open and clear. Every mile between the courthouse and the house felt like distance between my past and my peace. When I arrived, I stood at the doorway for a long time before stepping in. The house was still, quiet, and empty. Her things were already gone. Clothes, jewelry, makeup, all packed before the hearing, probably assuming she'd walk away richer. Instead, she walked away with nothing but debt and a lesson. That night, I sat on the porch, papers beside me, the wind brushing through the trees. It wasn't happiness that filled me. It was something better. Closure. The law had done what love couldn't. It had returned balance to a life that had been one-sided for too long. I didn't destroy her. I simply stopped letting her destroy me. The days after the court ruling felt almost unreal. The house, once filled with tension and fake smiles, had finally gone quiet. Not the heavy, suffocating silence of betrayal. This was different. It was calm. Honest. For the first time in years, I could walk from room to room and feel peace instead of suspicion. The drawers stayed exactly how I left them. The accounts stayed untouched. The air itself felt lighter. I didn't realize how much her presence had weighed on me until she was gone. People say you miss someone when they leave. That isn't always true. Sometimes absence feels like oxygen. I started each day simply. Woke up early, brewed coffee, sat by the window, and watched the sunrise through the same glass we once argued in front of. It was the same world, same trees, same light. But it looked new because I was finally seeing it without pretense. I cleaned the house myself, took out her leftover things, and boxed them neatly. Jewelry, clothes, framed photos, all packed, labeled, and stored away. I didn't throw them out. I didn't need to. They no longer meant anything. Objects only have power when emotion still lives inside them. Mine was gone. Neighbors started noticing the difference too. A few stopped by, curious but polite. They'd heard bits of the story. People always do. One of them asked if I was doing okay. I smiled and said, "Better than before." That was the truth. Better didn't mean happy. It meant stable. I could finally eat meals without feeling like I was sharing a table with deception. I could sleep without wondering who was planning against me under the same roof. Peace doesn't always look joyful. Sometimes it just looks like rest. I spent the next week sorting through my finances, making sure every account was under my control again. The bank manager greeted me respectfully. They'd already processed the asset reversals, and seeing my name restored as the sole owner of everything I built gave me a quiet sense of justice. No celebration, no pride, just satisfaction. The kind that comes from knowing right had finally outlasted wrong. I moved some money into a trust, updated my will, and sent a donation to a local charity in her name. Not out of kindness, out of irony. Let the world see her name where generosity actually existed. Evenings became my favorite time. I'd sit on the porch with a warm cup of tea, watching the light fade. I used to imagine her sitting beside me, complaining about small things, or planning her next purchase. Now the space was empty, and it finally belonged to me again. The wind sounded cleaner, the quiet more natural. Sometimes I'd hear laughter from neighbors' homes, couples, families, and I'd feel something like envy for a second. But it passed quickly, because I had something they didn't. Freedom without performance. I no longer had to smile when I didn't want to. I no longer had to pretend. A few weeks later, I received a letter from her lawyer. She had tried to appeal the financial ruling but was denied. The note was short, official, and emotionless. It ended with one line. "The matter is considered closed." I read it twice, folded it neatly, and placed it in a drawer. That sentence, those 6 words, were all I needed. The matter was closed. The chapter was finished. I decided not to move from the house. People told me I should start fresh somewhere new, but I didn't want to. This house was mine long before her lies ever touched it. Why should I leave the home I built just because someone else misused it? I had already reclaimed it, not just legally but emotionally. Every wall, every floorboard, every quiet evening belonged to me again. Sometimes I thought about her, not with anger, not with longing, but with a kind of detached curiosity. Where she was living, what she was doing, whether she had learned anything from all this. But those thoughts never lasted long, because the truth was simple. She no longer mattered. I didn't wish her pain. I just wished her distance. One night, I poured myself a drink and sat outside, staring up at the stars. The sky was clear, the air cool. I thought about everything that had happened. The theft, the lies, the courtroom, the silence that followed. It all felt distant now, like a story that had happened to someone else. That's when I realized what freedom really means. It isn't loud, it isn't dramatic. It's just the ability to sit quietly in your own life and feel safe again. I smiled for the first time in months. Not the forced smile of a husband keeping peace. A real one. Small, tired, and completely honest. My home was mine again. My peace was mine again. And after years of living beside someone who treated loyalty like currency, I had finally learned the greatest truth of all. Peace doesn't come from love. It comes from self-respect. It's strange how life has a way of showing you the truth, even when you spend years refusing to see it. I used to think loyalty meant staying, no matter what. I thought being a good husband meant forgiveness, compromise, patience. I spent decades keeping the peace, making excuses for small betrayals, believing that love could fix everything. But love without respect is a slow death. You don't feel it all at once. It happens piece by piece, argument by argument, lie by lie. And by the time you realize it, you're no longer in a marriage. You're in a contract signed by habit and fear. That's what my life had become, and I didn't see it until she made her final move, stealing my savings and calling it retirement. She thought it was just money. She didn't understand that she'd stolen more than that. She'd stolen the proof that all my years of sacrifice were worth something. And for that, I couldn't forgive her. Not because of greed, but because of what it meant. Now that it's all over, I look back and see the whole picture clearly. The warning signs were always there. The casual disregard, the selfish tone, the slow erosion of gratitude. But when you love someone, you blind yourself to reality because admitting the truth feels heavier than pretending. I used to tell myself she was just careless, that she didn't mean it. But people don't accidentally plan betrayals. They think about them. They justify them. They prepare for them. She didn't wake up one day and make a mistake. She built it step by step. And I let her, because I thought trust meant silence. It doesn't. Trust means accountability. If you have to stay quiet to keep the peace, there's no peace to begin with. The irony is that by stealing from me, she gave me something I never would have found otherwise, a reason to take my life back. That divorce wasn't an ending. It was a restart. It forced me to look at myself again, to rebuild not from money, but from dignity. I learned that you can lose everything and still come out richer if you regain self-respect. I learned that sometimes the person you share a bed with can become the thief of your identity, and you only realize it when you finally sleep alone and feel peace instead of emptiness. People ask me now if I'd ever marry again. I always say no, not out of bitterness, but because I've already found what I was looking for. Not in another person, but in myself. I wake up when I want, cook when I want, spend what I want. My peace doesn't depend on someone else's mood. My happiness doesn't rely on keeping someone comfortable at my expense. There's power in that kind of simplicity. Power I didn't know I was missing until I took it back. I've kept the divorce decree in a frame on my desk, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that freedom isn't given, it's taken. The paper doesn't represent loss, it represents a line drawn after years of letting things slide. Every man, every woman who's ever been betrayed should understand this. You can't change someone's heart, but you can protect your own. The moment someone crosses that line, you either correct it or you become part of your own destruction. I corrected mine, quietly, legally, completely. Sometimes at night, when I sit on the porch with a cup of tea, I think about her final words in court. She said I'd regret being alone. Maybe she believed that. But she never understood that there are two kinds of loneliness, one that breaks you and one that saves you. The first comes from being unseen in your own home. The second comes from walking away from the people who made you feel unseen. I chose the second, and I've never regretted it. She took my savings and called it her retirement. I took her freedom and called it divorce. The law gave me back my money, but time gave me back myself. I don't need revenge. I don't even need an apology. My peace is proof that I won. Some thefts end in prison. Others end in paperwork signed by a man who finally remembered his worth. If you're watching this, remember this lesson. Betrayal doesn't destroy you. It reveals you. It shows you who you were, who you loved, and who you'll never be again. And if you ever find yourself sitting across from someone who steals from you, whether it's your trust, your time, or your money, don't fight with anger. Fight with logic. Fight with law. Fight with silence. Because nothing shakes a betrayer more than the moment they realize you didn't scream. You simply ended the story.